D2L to make sure you're completing everything in the correct on the correct day. Okay, so now we're going to enter into our immunology unit. Okay, the next several chapters are going to be dealing with the immune system and how the immune system keeps the body healthy and safe, and then what happens when the immune system goes a little rogue or gets a little too sensitive. And so there'll be a chapter about that as well. But we're going to start out with chapter 11, which deals with the innate immunity. And before we define that, let's talk about immune response. Okay? So an immune response is a physiological process. So remember, anatomy is the body's structures, and physiology is how the body works. Okay? So the immune response is a physiological process. Okay? And it works in conjunction. This process involves the lymphatic system, it's going to involve the circulatory system, a lot of the different body systems, a lot of different factors, a lot of different cells, a lot of things play into how the immune response works. And all these body systems working together have one goal, and that is to eliminate any kind of cell or virus or anything that the body determines is foreign. And those foreign substances will have on them what are called antigens. And so this book defines antigen as a foreign substance. Okay, so anything that's foreign. So the immune system is going to be going around looking for things that are self, that should be there, and then it'll be also looking for things that are foreign, things that should not be there. Now, my other textbook that I've used in the past, I kind of like its definition of antigen a little bit better, and that defines an antigen as a molecule that elicits, okay, or causes, elicits, or another word would be causes, an immune response. Okay, so an antigen is basically a little marker molecule or some structure on a bacterium or virus or anything else that's foreign that the body basically identifies as foreign. Okay, now the immune system has two major branches or two major components. And the first one, which is dealing with our chapter here, is the innate immune system, and the other is the adaptive. Oops. Okay, and that's going to be in chapter 12. Now, we're going to focus on some of the differences here in a little bit, but there's some similarities that they have as well. Okay, so I know we just got done with one test, but looking ahead to the next one, some things that you're going to want to remember is how they are similar, how innate and adaptive immunity is similar, and then also what makes them different. Okay, so both of these types of immunity recognize pathogens, recognize a lot of different types of pathogens, and they also will then try to eliminate those identified pathogens. Okay, so they'll identify them, recognize them, eliminate them through various methods, and then also both are able to discriminate or determine the difference between self and foreign antigens. We don't want to attack self, right? That's called an autoimmune disorder, when the immune system attacks itself. Okay, so that's a problem. We don't want that to happen. So it's important that the immune system is able to identify self versus non-self. Okay, so innate immunity is something that you are born with. Okay, like, just like anything else, innate means that you just have it within you, or you're born with it. Some people are innately athletic. They're just born athletic. Okay, other people, to be competitive, they have to really, really work hard because they're not born that way. Okay, so innate immunity is something that you're born with, and also something that you have because You're human. Okay, so you have skin because you're a human. You're born with it. Okay, skin is an example of one of the components of innate immunity. Another example of a property of innate immunity is that it has generalized responses, and then also that it has that is non-specific. Okay, it's going to work against all foreign invaders. It does not try to identify specific invaders or specific pathogens. Okay, it's not going to say, "Ooh, you're E. coli 0157H7. I recognize you. I'm going to keep you out." It says basically that you're foreign. I don't care who you are. You're not coming in. Okay, whereas adaptive immunity would look specifically for different types of antigens or pathogens. Okay, so adaptive immunity is something that's only found in vertebrate animals, and it matures over time. Okay, it's not something that you are born with. Okay, it matures over time, and its responses are tailored to specific pathogens. Okay, it's tailored based on, oops, come back. Based on the person's exposure. Okay, so I like to give the example. I grew up on a farm. I've been around livestock my whole life. Okay, there are certain pathogens that are transmitted by livestock and in their feces and things like that. So over the years, I've been exposed to some of those pathogens. Okay, so I have built up some immunity. Now, if you've lived in town your whole life and you've never really been around livestock, you wouldn't have built up any exposure or any immunity to those pathogens because you just haven't been exposed to it. And that's okay. We're all different. You probably have something that you're immune to or that you've had exposure to that I've never had exposure to. So it's very personalized. Okay, each person is going to have a different repertoire of things that they are immune to because of their exposures. Okay, now innate immunity, it happens very quickly, it's immediate. Whereas adaptive immunity takes a few days to get going, takes a little bit longer. But the good thing is that it has memory. Okay, so when I'm exposed to something, my body remembers what that is, and this response time can be a lot quicker, and it provides some immunity, it provides some protection for me. Okay, now I mentioned that I've been exposed to some things that you haven't, and vice versa. Okay, so there are some things that I am immune to, that if I get exposed to it, my immune system has basically built up a memory and is going to protect me against that specific pathogen. Okay, so right now in society, it seems like most people are susceptible to COVID-19 because this is a novel virus. We haven't ever seen it before. Yes, it's a type of coronavirus. It's similar to SARS and MERS and some of the other viruses that cause the common cold, but it has new unique properties. So our immune systems haven't ever had any exposure to it. And so the majority of the population, if not the whole human population, is susceptible to COVID-19 because we don't have an immunity built up yet. We haven't recognized, our bodies haven't recognized this pathogen before. Where if you were to say, I am immune to this year's flu because I've already had it, that's a little different. Your body's been exposed to it and your body knows how to fight it now. Okay, so that's the difference between those two terms. A susceptible person is one that doesn't have immunity built up and they could get that infection or disease. Okay, so here's a really good chart comparing adaptive and innate immunity. So you might want to highlight this one or put a star here so that you have it as you're moving ahead toward the next exam, because this one will be really important. So response time with innate immunity is immediate. Happens pretty quickly. Okay. Adaptive, 4 to 7 days. All eukaryotes have innate immunity. Only vertebrate animals have adapted. Both are going to distinguish self versus foreign invaders. Both are going to have certain aspects that kill foreign invaders. Both are effective against a diverse number and type of threats. Taylor's response to specific antigens or specific pathogens. Do you guys remember which one that was? Okay, was it innate or was it adaptive? That tailors it specifically to a specific type of organism or specific antigen. That would be the adaptive. Innate does not do that. It's non-specific. It just recognizes everything is foreign and it doesn't care if it's foreign. It's going to eliminate it or identify it as worthy of attack. Is there a memory? Does it remember that response? Nope. But yes, with the adaptive. Okay, so definitely make sure you highlight that table there and know the differences between innate and adaptive immunity. Okay, so the immune system to me is really amazing how it works. It's just absolutely incredible how all these different components in the body come together and protect itself. And I think if I remember correctly, I told you guys a story about the patient that had an he was immunocompromised because he was taking anti-rejection drugs or immunosuppressant drugs to help his body not reject an organ transplant that he had. And anytime he would have an injury or susceptible to an infection, he was supposed to go to the emergency room right away. And he was playing around with his niece, and his niece bit him in the face. And they rushed him to the emergency room, and his immune system obviously was compromised. It wasn't protecting him fully because of the medication he was on. And you know, for most of us, bites are nasty, right? For most of us, if we were to be bitten on the face or anywhere, might get red and swollen, maybe even get some discharge, some pus coming from that. But for most of us, it's not going to be life-threatening in most circumstances. But for this man, it definitely was. Within, and I forget the exact timeline, but within just an hour or so, maybe, his whole face was swollen and red, and the infection had spread throughout his face. And luckily for him, as soon as he was taken to the ER, they put him on IV antibiotics to start trying to get ahead of this bacterial infection. And within a couple of hours, he had to be intubated. They had to put a tube down his throat to breathe for him because the infection had spread down his neck and his trachea. His windpipe had closed and he was unable to breathe. So it's just really amazing to see what happens when our immune system's not working optimally, how fast bacteria can take over our body. Okay, you know, like I said, most of us, yeah, would be sore for a while, but we would keep it contained in that particular area. Here, his immune system wasn't working and it spread. Literally, it would have been throughout his whole body if they hadn't started the antibiotics within just a couple of hours, and it would have taken his life. So the immune system is really amazing. And I like to think of it as sort of like a tactical military type of defense, because you have 3 layers or 3 lines of defense. Okay, so and this is something that you'll want to kind of star and highlight as well. So innate immune system involves the first and second lines of defense. Okay, so this is innate. And then the third line is adaptive. And we'll talk about that again in chapter 12. But the first line of defense is kind of like the perimeter, the walls around the fort, the moat around the castle, okay? Just like the physical barrier defenses to keep, and remember these are not specific, just to keep everybody out, okay? Keep all foreign things out. And then the second line of defense, and we'll get into these more specifically, is some cells, like white blood cells, and also other defenses, like inflammation and fever, that once a pathogen has breached the first line of defense, the second and third line come in and start to protect as well. Okay, so the third line of defense is going to be those ones that are very specific. These would be like your SEAL teams that are targeting a particular, like Osama bin Laden or something. They're targeting a particular target. That would be the third line of defense. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this semester our normal microbiota. We know that they outcompete pathogens, and they're really good to help. We have really good relationships with a lot of them as long as they stay in the right place and in the right amounts. Okay, we don't want them to get overloaded too much. But our normal microbiota, these normal microbiota, play an important role in training and getting our immune system built up. Okay, there have been animal studies where clean animals, where their animals are kept in a very clean, sanitary environment, a lot of disinfecting, things like that, that show that they have an underdeveloped immune system. Okay, so that has led scientists to come up with what's called the hygiene hypothesis, which proposes that if you decrease the diversity and the amount or the levels of microbes in our normal microbiota, that can negatively affect our immune systems. So there's evidence out there that maybe we're too clean. Maybe we haven't had exposures to enough microbes to really train and get our immune system to where it should be. And there are studies out there that are linking kind of this hygiene hypothesis to an increase in the number of allergies that people have, because their idea is that the immune system is just bored and it hasn't been properly trained, and so it is attacking pollen and other allergens that aren't necessarily harmful to the body. Okay, let's see. All right, so let's look at this innate immunity. Remember, it's going to have the first, oops, that's an and, second lines of defense. So here's the first line of defense in innate immunity. And that is going to be involving attempts to prevent pathogen entry. Okay, these are barriers. Okay, like the fence with the razor wire. Okay, trying to keep things out, preventing pathogens from coming in. And there's three types that we're going to see in the next couple of slides. The first one are mechanical barriers. Okay, mechanical barriers involve flushing, rinsing, and trapping of foreign substances. So for example, tears wash dirt away. Okay, if you get something in your eye waters. Okay, it's helping to wash not only that big you know, piece of sand or whatever that's in your eye, but also any microbes that have come along with it. Okay. There are what's called the mucociliator, mucociliary, there we go, escalator, where mucus traps dirt, bacteria, things like that down in the trachea and in the lungs. And then cilia, these little green projections here, sweep that dirt, that junk up so you can cough that out. Okay, so those would be some mechanical barriers. Chemical barriers are certain chemicals, like lysozyme is an enzyme that you can find in tears. It's also in tears to help protect the eye, and in saliva that basically kill bacteria. So it prevents them from entering the body. Stomach acid is another example. And then there are what are called AMPs, or special proteins, that can kill bacteria as well. Okay, so mechanical, chemical, and physical, physical structures basically form a physical barrier. Okay, intact skin that doesn't have any cuts or abrasions or anything like that, it provide a physical barrier to keep things out. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of this. Tears, urine flushes microbes out, the mucociliary escalator there. We've talked about some of those. Okay, the chemical barriers, the lysozyme enzyme, the acid, hydrochloric, if you want to put that there, hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Those actually attack the pathogens or make the environment inhospitable for them to not maybe be able to live in that area. And we saw, if you remember, the differential agar lab where we had the EMB and the McConkey and the mannitol salt agar. Remember, we saw only a few types of microbes can live on that mannitol salt agar, because that's used to mimic the salty, slightly acidic environment found on the skin. And so we could see visually there that the skin, because of these properties here, prevent a lot of microbes from growing there. Okay. And then the physical barriers, skin is our most important physical barrier. Burn patients are very, very susceptible to infection because they don't have that first line of defense. They don't have that physical barrier protecting them. And then also with the skin, the top layer of the skin is dead epithelial cells, or dead skin cells. And every time you move, you shed dead skin cells. And so those skin cells take bacteria and other pathogens away with them when they fall out. Okay, so that was the first line of defense, okay, that prevent pathogen entry. The second line of defense kicks in when the first line is breached. Okay, so there's an assorted molecular factors. Okay, we'll talk about those. And also, oh, sorry, I talk too much and I yawn. What we call leukocytes, L-E-U-K-O. Oh my gosh, I'm going to start over. Leukocytes. Okay, those are also known as white blood cells. Okay, so leukocyte is the fancy word for white blood cell. Okay, we're going to talk about some different types of white blood cells as well. But just as a side note and kind of a review for those that have had A and P, blood is made up of white blood cells, or leukocytes, red blood cells. Do you remember what those are called? Erythrocytes. And platelets and plasma. Okay, those are the components of blood. Okay, but we're going to focus on the leukocytes, or also known as the white blood cells. Okay, now, excuse me, talked about the blood a little bit. The lymphatic system is also going to play an important role. And the lymphatic system's job is to collect, circulate, and filter, fluid in the body. And then that filtered fluid is going to return to the blood. My A and P people, you guys remember where it's returned to? The subclavian veins. And then goes back to the heart. Okay, so the blood leaks some fluid out in here into what we call the interstitial spaces in between the cells. The lymphatic system picks up that excess fluid. Here in a lymph node, it will filter it and check for foreign invaders. Okay, kind of do some surveillance. And then that fluid will move on its way back into the heart, back into circulation. Okay, so the lymphatic system is, and we'll talk more about this in the next chapter, but the lymphatic system is basically a major player in the immune response. It's kind of like the site where a lot of these things are going to happen. Okay, so here's an example. There's different types of lymphatic tissue. There's a lot of vessels, and these are not all of them, but that take this fluid and dump it back into the subclavian veins up here, the spleen, the thymus, your tonsils and adenoids, lymph nodes. Those are all part of the lymphatic system. We have a couple of 500 to 700 lymph nodes. That's all these little circles there, green circles, and they are going to filter that fluid and also screen it or conduct surveillance. Serve as filter and screening centers for lymph before it returns to the bloodstream. If in the lymph nodes an inviting microbe, say a bacterium or group of bacteria, are detected, the lymph node will have white blood cells in there that start to divide and rapidly multiply. The lymph node will then become swollen because of all that activity. And then, have you ever gone to the doctor, maybe with an upper respiratory something, and they feel your throat here? What they're doing is trying to feel your lymph nodes to see if they're swollen, because if they are, that could be a sign of infection. Okay, so there's a few slides just like last time that I'm going to skip. This talks a little bit more about blood components. But we're going to focus on those white blood cells or those leukocytes. Okay. This chart here is on page 331, so you might want to look at that to have a better view and to be able to read this a little bit better because it's so tiny in your handout there. But these are the different types of white blood cells, and they're divided into two categories, into granulocytes and agranulocytes. Okay, so if you think of granulated sugar or tabled sugar, okay, versus say powdered sugar. Okay, table sugar, granulated sugar is grainy, right? If you look at these are all microscopic views, and this is really clear, the mast cells, but they look very grainy. Okay, a lot of big grains on here, versus these others, and in science, remember A means without, these others are not grainy looking under the microscope. And again, these aren't my favorite pictures because they all kind of look grainy to me, but in these images here. But those are the different categories that we could categorize white blood cells in. Okay, so the granulocytes, the grainy looking ones, are going to include neutrophils, eosinophils, basophils, and mast cells. And then the agranulocytes are going to be monocytes, dendritic cells, and lymphocytes. Okay, all of these here are part of the innate immunity. They do not act specifically. Lymphocytes, however, which include the B and the T cells, I'm going to actually put this arrow down here. These are the ones that work with the adaptive immunity. NK cells also technically go with the innate immunity. Okay, so each of these cells has a different function. Neutrophils are phagocytes. Eosinophils attack allergens and parasites like tapeworms or parasitic worms. Basophils attack allergens and parasites as well, but they also stimulate inflammation. Mast cells, if you have allergies and you get the runny nose, the itchy eyes, you can blame that on these guys. Monocytes and dendritic cells are phagocytes. And we'll talk about what those are. And then NK, B, and T cells are going to attack different types of foreign cells. Just real quickly, just wanted to point out, you know, if you ever go to a hospital and have your blood drawn, like a complete blood count, or if they're trying to test you for an infection, maybe they're not sure if it's bacterial or viral, what they can do is what's called the differential white blood cell count. And that is a test that they can do to determine the percentage of neutrophils, the percentage of lymphocytes, the percentage of basophils, and see how many of each type of cell there is. And that can tell us a lot of information. Looking at what's called leukocytosis, that is going to be an increase in total leukocytes or total white blood cells. Okay, a lot of times leukocytosis or an increase indicates some sort of infection. Whereas on the opposite of that, leukopenia is a decrease in number of total white blood cells. Okay, times when you would see leukopenia would be patients undergoing cancer treatment. Chemotherapy will destroy white blood cells and drop that. If a person is on immunosuppressant drugs, some types of leukemia as well will cause white blood cell numbers to drop. Okay, so this table is interesting. It gives you examples of different increases or leukocytoses. So if you have an excess number of neutrophils, that would be an acute bacterial infection. If you have high levels of eosinophils, you could have allergies, asthma, or some sort of parasitic worm. Increase of basophils, we don't really see that usually. Monocytes could be a chronic infection, or lymphocyte increase in number could be a viral infection or a chronic infection, one that you've had for a long, long time. So in order for the white blood cells to work, okay, they have to be identified, or a foreign invader has to be identified, and they have to basically be recruited or called to the site of infection. And so I just lost myself here. Okay. There are some of these slides that I noticed that I have that you don't have. So sorry about that. We will cross this off. But basically, the leukocytes have to be called to a site where the infection is occurring. And that's kind of what this was getting into. So sorry, I guess I don't have that one. one major important role of white blood cells or leukocytes is this idea of phagocytosis. And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail because this lecture is going to get kind of lengthy. But I want you to watch two videos. And they're on D2L, and they'll be posted underneath this lecture below. They are two videos on phagocytosis. Okay, so you can stop and watch those now or here in a minute or wait till the end. But I definitely want you to watch those two videos and learn a little bit more about phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is basically when a cell, like a macrophage or a dendritic cell or a neutrophil, goes and basically grabs onto, ingests, and destroys a microbe or a foreign invader. Okay, so watch those videos and then come back. Okay, so we mentioned phagocytes. Okay, neutrophils are a type of white blood cell that can phagocytize foreign cells and viruses that can grab on them and digest them, like you saw in the video. Neutrophils are the most numerous white blood cell. So if you look at all of them, most of the white blood cells you'll find are the neutrophils. They are the first white blood cell that's recruited, basically the first responders that are going to make it to an injury. Let's see. As we said, elevated neutrophil count could be an acute bacterial infection. Neutropenia would be a decrease. Penia means decrease, like with leukopenia. Eosinophils, those are going to be involved with, it's not on here, those parasitic worm, or parasite or allergy responses. Eosinophilia would happen, you'd have an elevated or too many eosinophils if you have severe allergies or that parasite infection. Basophils, basophils help release what are called chemical messages called histamines. We'll talk a lot more about those when we get into allergies. But basophils help with parasitic infections and also allergies and inflammation, because that's one of the things that histamine does, is cause inflammation. Okay, mast cells also release histamine. When we talk about allergies, we'll talk about those a lot more when we get into that in a few chapters. Okay, so some key phagocytes. Monocytes are important phagocytes. They're going to mature into what we call macrophages. Okay, so we'll see here in a little bit that these monocytes can migrate or leave the bloodstream in a process called diapedesis. We'll talk about that here in just a little bit. And when they do that, they're called macrophages. And they're going to go around and ingest different foreign substances. Okay, whoops, let me go back. Another type of important macrophage or important phagocytes are dendritic cells, and we're going to talk more how they play in with the adaptive immunity next time. Okay, so we're skipping that one, and then moving into the lymphocytes. Okay, lymphocytes, again, are going to be agranulocytes. Okay, so we have a lot of sites: monocytes, leukocytes, basophils, eosinophils. You might want to make some note cards to kind of remember each one of these and what they do. Okay, definitely know which ones are part of innate immunity and which ones the B and T cells or B and T lymphocytes are going to be a part of which type of immunity. These are the adaptive immunity they're going to be involved with, and the NK, or also called natural killer cells, are part of the innate immune system. Okay, here's some NK cells. Again, these are part of the innate, so they're non-specific. They're not looking for specific pathogens, but they will help protect against viruses, bacteria, and even tumor cells. Okay, they're going to be looking for cancerous cells and taking those out as well, because they're not going to be a normal body cell. Okay, so we mentioned that white blood cells have to be called into action. Okay, so to call white blood cells into action, there are molecules that are going to be released during this time. And what we call cytokines, C-Y-T-O-K-I-N-E-S, cytokines are chemical messages. And there's lots of different kinds of chemical messages. Your book gets into some of these specifically. I'm not going to. But they're chemical messages that cause inflammation, fever, warn the body of viral infection, activate the immune system, a lot of different chemical messages. There are iron binding proteins that are involved with this chemical action. I'm not going to talk a lot about that. And then there's also complement proteins. And complement proteins are a series of proteins that cause a cascade of reactions. Okay, and I'm not going to get into the complement cascade. There's like 30 different proteins and all kinds of different reactions that go on. But at the end of the day, don't worry about the different types of complement pathways. But at the end of the day, what complement does is it will result in inflammation. And we'll see why that's important here in just a bit. A membrane attack complex, which causes the cell to lyse, basically kills the cell. Okay, whether it's a bacterial cell, an infected tumor cell, or whatever. So complement is going to stimulate inflammation. It can kill a foreign or infected cell. And then also this process called opsonization. And opsonization is basically a tag or an identifier that's placed on a particular type of pathogen. Basically, these complement proteins will attach to the foreign invader, and that foreign invader is now marked, and then the phagocytes can come and easily detect that foreign invader. Okay, let me make sure I didn't miss one here. Nope. Okay. So once white blood cells are activated, they can make it to the site of infection, be drawn by chemical messages called cytokines. They can release more cytokines, and they can also stimulate complement cycle. Okay, the last couple of things that I want to talk about is fever and inflammation. And I'm going to stop here, and I'm going to pick up fever and inflammation on the next video. Okay, so there's going to be 2 for this chapter. So let's stop here, and then we'll come back and talk about fever and inflammation in the next one.